Hey there, Lincoln here with BoAcademy.org. Today I want to talk about, say first, congratulations to the SoFi Bulls out there who have been holding for over a year or 2 years now as it's going down and, of course, come back up. But today I want to speak about Bitcoin because that's also having a rally and it's going very well for those who have held it throughout the many ups and downs over the years, especially those who survived those ups and downs because not everyone survived. And that's really what I want to talk about today because not everyone will survive Bitcoin. And I put this on my Instagram and I said pretty much that, hey, if you own Bitcoin, I am very happy for you. And if you don't, then what I want you to know is that you have to understand that this could have gone the other direction. It could have just dropped and dropped very fast and very far. So I wouldn't be so upset with yourself for not investing in Bitcoin when you were younger or in 2017, 2018, 2022, whatever the case is. I wouldn't beat yourself up for not having put your hard-earned money into a risky, speculative token. I can't even say the word asset because it's not productive. It doesn't have any intrinsic value of its own. What gives its value is that people put money in it and they hope that it doesn't go down. Let me move this mic because it might be in the way actually. I haven't done the video in a while, so forgive me if I am doing something silly. Let me check my mic. But that was what I put on Instagram. So I started there. And I wanted to also touch on the tulip mania from back in 1634. So it says here on Google, tulips sold for approximately 10,000 guilders, that's their currency back then, at the height of the bubble, equal to the value of a mansion on the Amsterdam Grand Canal. Tulips were introduced to Holland in 1593. The bubble occurred primarily from 1634 to 1637. And this was called tulip mania. This was the Dutch tulip bulb market bubble. And it lasted for about 3 years. Just a little comparison to another bubble, another asset that had no value, but people wanted to assert its value and give it value, decree that it has value, decree value. It's kind of like fiat, right? To decree that something has value. By decree, this token that I invented and put online is digital gold, is a store of value, is a hedge against inflation. I decree that it has value, and so you should buy it too. And over time, people have bought onto it, and it's going up very high and then back down, and then of course it's going up again. So that's good for people who have survived all of the ups and downs and have earned lots of money from this or money on paper. But for most people, that has not been the case. Many people have been burned in this up and down. And the problem is that Bitcoin has no intrinsic value. So that value, whatever value you apply to it today, can be wiped out overnight at the blink of a moment. Someone can say, one of the big whales, the few people who really own Bitcoin, who control Bitcoin, they can change their mind and say, hey, I don't think this is a good idea, or I've gotten all the money I care to get out of it. I've fooled enough people. I'm going to take out what I have and be done with this. And if enough people do that, it tanks, as it has many times. And I know people will say over the long term, it will stay high, but you won't survive the short term. That's the problem. If you're here putting a lot of money into this thing because someone told you that it's worth something when it's not, you're gonna get burnt because you can't hold on forever. You can't hold through the downturns if there is no reason to. And the reason would be that it has its own intrinsic value, like a business, like sort of like SoFi. SoFi is an actual business that provides actual value to customers, actual customers in an economy. So that makes sense to hold through the downturns. But it's not the case for something that has no intrinsic value of its own. If you're holding it, you're only holding it because you hope that someone else is going to buy it from you in the future. Or someone else is going to change their mind and say, hey, I actually think this has value again. You're hoping that consensus changes in your favor. Not that this thing's value increases like a business's value might increase because they're producing more value for customers in an economy. So that's the issue here, and that's what I'm getting at in my Instagram post. Again, you can follow me at Lincoln W. Daniel on Instagram. I talk politics, economy, investing, whatever I feel like talking about, I talk about that. And you can, of course, chime in via my DMs, and I will respond to you anonymously. I don't put anyone's names or profile pictures in my posts because I don't want to out anyone for any reason. I want you to share your thoughts freely with me and trust that I won't reveal who you are. So if you have any thoughts on this, comment below, and of course follow me on Instagram and let me know what your thoughts are. I go on to say, the market can remain irrational longer than you can remain solvent. Of course, this is a famous investment quote. And the reason I said this is because I've been against Bitcoin for a long time. And so far, it's been going up very high. But of course, it's going down during that time. But my belief that it's not worth anything has not bared out in the long term since it was launched. But I'm also correct in that it has gone down. Lots of people have been hurt by it. So I'm saying that cuts both ways in this slide of my Instagram story. But at some point, the market does self-correct. It does eventually correct the value of these assets. A business like Amazon was very poorly valued when they first launched S3, Amazon Web Services S3, Simple Storage Service. And now S3 is the bedrock for all of the internet, basically. Of course, that's not fully true. There's lots of other competitors out there. But S3 is the main storage system on the internet that all the companies that you know of are built on top of. So the market doesn't always understand the value of a business. But if that business is productive, if it is serving actual customers over the long term, the market will start to see the actual value here and then correct itself, self-correct. And now Amazon is one of the most valuable companies ever. But Bitcoin doesn't have any actual value, neither does tulip bulbs. It's just a flower. There's no actual value there. This Google screenshot I have here in my Instagram story, it says, in February 1637, remember the mania started in 1634, tulip traders could no longer find new buyers willing to pay increasingly inflated prices for their bulbs. As this realization set in, the demand for tulips collapsed and prices plummeted. The speculative bubble burst. This is exactly what it is with Bitcoin. The greater fool theory. The belief that there will be a greater fool tomorrow that will buy your investment off of you for a higher price than you paid. But the problem is there aren't infinite fools, and you can't be so sure that you are not the greatest fool at any given moment, because as soon as you buy, it can tank because consensus changes, just as it did in the mania of the tulip bulb. And so we're in 16 years now, and almost 16 years. And we still don't have a mainstream use of this Bitcoin or cryptocurrencies. There's a study from Australia, I think it was 2023, where they survey a representative percentage of the population, and they asked them about different payment services and payment tools. And the first one is PayPal, next one is Buy Now, Pay Later, and then cryptocurrencies, PayID, QR code, Beam, and Air, and Alipay / WeChat Pay. So they asked them, have you heard of this method of payment? And then they asked them, have you used this method of payment in the last 12 months? And so, of course, PayPal is mostly, yes, I've heard of it. And then a good chunk of those people have actually used it. And then Buy Now, Pay Later is also pretty much equally, yes, I've heard of it. Most people have heard of it. And then a reasonable percentage have actually used it. And then cryptocurrency is next. And good amount of people have heard of it, but virtually none of them actually have used it in the last 12 months. The study stops at 12 months because that's what they chose. But if you extend that to 2 years, 10 years, 16 years, it will stay virtually the same. Because there's no uses of Bitcoin. No legitimate uses, really. And the one use, which is, there's chaos in my society, in my country, and I happen to have Bitcoin, and so I'm going to leave and go to another country and sell that Bitcoin and get money in that new country and start my life over. That I understand, that's noble, but it's not likely. If there's chaos in your country, there's a low chance you're getting out for the masses. Of course, there are people who are rich and they will get out. But if you're rich, Bitcoin is not your salvation. You already are rich. You don't have any problems with getting money. You probably have money in many places in the world already. So that solution isn't such of a problem. So its only widespread use, engagement, is the same or akin to the latest overdue lottery drawing, because when everyone sees that there's this lottery picking that hasn't been drawn yet, that it's overdue, it keeps no one wins for multiple cycles, and now it's at $100 million, it's at $1 billion, $2 billion. Everyone wants to hop in because they hope that they can win on luck. They hope that, hey, this is not really, I'm not really going to lose much, but I can gain incredible amounts of money. So I'm going to hop in and buy my lottery ticket and hopefully win. But that's it. The next day they forget about it because there's no use of a lottery ticket. There's no use for Bitcoin. So then we get into the responses, and I love taking responses from my Instagram followers because I like to engage in conversation. Even if you disagree with me, let's discuss it. So someone responds to my earlier statements and say, deflationary hedge is the use. And what I think they mean by that is that Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies are a hedge against inflation. So I've heard this many times, and I've also heard that it is digital gold, and that hasn't worked in practice because there's no use for Bitcoin. And so then it can only be digital gold, or it can only be gold if there's a use for it. Gold has use, has actual use. You can use it for jewelry and for industrial uses, mechanical uses. So that doesn't work. So then it said it's a store of value until that value is cut in half, until you get wiped out. Like another follower told me that happened to them in 2017. And then they say it's a hedge against inflation, but that only works if the asset has value. And then of course you have to see number one, which was that it's not digital gold. It doesn't have any value. So number three doesn't work either, because you can't hedge with something that has no value. Because that thing is going to lose whatever value, current moment value it has, if the economy starts to struggle, because people are going to try to pull their money out. So if people are pulling their money out during inflation because they need more money to go spend, because you told them that it's a digital currency as well. So it's both a store of value and a digital currency. So people are going to use it as a currency. And if they're using it as a currency, that means that the value of this thing is going to go down, because its value is tied to how much fiat currency has been put into it, how much USD has been put into it. So if they take out the money that they need to go spend it, there is less value in that cryptocurrency, in Bitcoin, which means that other people are going to see that and then also draw out their money, because they're afraid that the floor is going to collapse under them. There's going to be a rug pull. And that's what keeps happening. So it has not bared out that it's a hedge against inflation, because it's so dependent, it's so tethered to the underlying currency, which is USD. And so I need someone to explain to me this argument, this deflationary hedge, this hedge against inflation. If you have more explanations, because I must not be understanding this correctly. I must be really dumb, because I can't quite follow how this works, because every time I try to make sense of it, I just end up disproving it. The proof isn't there. One of my favorite classes, math classes, actually my most favorite math class in college, university for my computer science degree was, what's it called? Discrete math. And my favorite proof in discrete math was proof by contradiction. So every time I try to make sense of these arguments for Bitcoin and for cryptocurrencies, I always land at a proof by contradiction against Bitcoin. It's contradictory. All of the arguments for it are contradictory. So then we continue to our next slide on Instagram. And one of my other followers responds to me, sends me a DM and says, they got burned in 2017 and they've been chilling ever since. Yeah. Bitcoin is a great store of value until other people decide that it's not overnight. And those people have low information. They might just be reacting to somebody else taking their money out. And so Bitcoin climbs. Everyone has FOMO. And then at one other moment, someone decides, oh, actually, I don't like this anymore. And they sell. And so then it falls. And the problem is because there is an asymmetry of information, you're going to be the last one to know. And so as it's falling, someone else sells up here, and you're selling down here. Because you are last to know. You might be the greatest fool at that moment. There is no greater fool now. You are the greater fool. You're the greatest fool. Because you don't have the information that the bigger people have in this system. So that's when your value loses its store. And that's when your hedge against inflation completely fails at its only job, which is to be your fallback. It fails as your fallback. So what's its duty? What's its role? What's the value of it? If it can't hold value, if you can't spend it in the economy, and you can't actually use it as a hedge, because as soon as the economy starts to fail, it starts to struggle. And notice that Bitcoin is on a rise now as our economy is also back on the rise, as inflation is dropping incredibly fast because the Federal Reserve has figured out how to manage that. And now they're lowering interest rates because the economy is doing well, inflation is on a downturn. So Bitcoin was struggling when inflation was high, and now Bitcoin is rising as inflation falls. That seems opposite to the assertion that Bitcoin is a hedge against inflation. Again, a proof by contradiction. So we move on. And so another Instagram follower messages me and they say, "Hi Link, I think you are wrong here. Bitcoin may have short-term fluctuations that do not protect against inflation. However, you should invest in Bitcoin for a longer time frame. Just like ETFs are a tool for value accumulation against fiat, I see Bitcoin the same. The long-term trajectory of Bitcoin is up and a significant outperformance of fiat currencies. Also, with more adoption, I think the risk of Bitcoin dropping significantly as in early days is reduced every year." Okay. So today I say I like to write. And so I must insist that words have meaning. And so I want to take a look at a few of those words from this. So they made their case. So now here's my case in response. Here's my response to it. First, we'll look at the word ETFs, the phrase ETFs in his statement. ETFs, that stands for Exchange Traded Funds. And I say that an ETF is not a tool for accumulation against fiat. Actually, an ETF is a fund that invests in a pool of companies across an industry or a market category. All it does is regulate losses by spreading your money wider than you could effectively on your own. And so what I'm saying there is that they don't actually understand what an ETF is or what the purpose of an ETF is. They see something that, okay, so as inflation goes up, as money loses its value, ETFs invest in assets, and so my investment is a hedge against inflation. Yes, that makes sense. But it's not a tool for that. That's not the purpose of it. Purpose of it is to invest in a wide array of assets, productive assets that will hopefully gain value in the future, but also protect you against losses should any one of them die, cease to exist. So that's very important, because before you can make an argument comparing two things and saying that they're the same, you must actually understand what the first thing is and have a good understanding of that. And so I just want to stay for a moment and say, just because you think that the sun is a tool for heating outer space, you can't just say, I also see an oven the same. First, the sun isn't a tool for heating space. It just so happens that the sun is hot and there are planets around, bodies of objects around that take on that heat. That's what it is. The sun isn't a tool for heating space. It just so happens to heat space and the things around it. So you can't say that, okay, so then given that, from that, I'm going to conclude that an oven also is a tool for heating space. In this case, I guess space is the space in which the oven sits. No, that's not the purpose of an oven. It just so happens to heat the space around it. But the purpose of an oven is very different. It's to heat the food within that oven. So I wanted to state all of that because Bitcoin isn't like an ETF. They're not operating under the same principles. So my problem here, the reason I stuck on this, because Bitcoin folk, cryptocurrency folk, they love to just say things, to anything, to make an argument for Bitcoin. It doesn't have to make sense. The goal is to give you anything else to talk about so that you don't have to look at their actual reasoning, the actual problem with Bitcoin, so that you don't have time to consider all of that. They will just distract you with all this other stuff over here. Look over here, look over here. Don't look at the problem with Bitcoin because it has no value and we're only speculating on it and hoping that somebody else in the future will buy from us at a higher value, higher price than they actually bought it for. That's what they do. So we continue in responding to this user. And so I tell them, hey, I get what you're trying to say. I get what your assertion is here. Bitcoin is a hedge against inflation, just as an ETF invests in assets. And so it's also hedging against inflation. I get it. I get the argument. But my problem is that I can't agree with it because ETFs invest in productive assets. Companies like SoFi and Amazon and Google and waste management company. And these companies actually provide value to customers in the economy. They're productive. And so it makes sense to invest in them in the short term and the long term, because in the long term, as long as they don't stop for whatever reason, just for no reason at all, which is unlikely to happen, so long as they keep servicing their customers, they'll continue to be productive. They'll continue to produce value for the economy. And so their value will increase, or at least stay the same, or at least not just get wiped out. So that's not the same as an asset or a coin or whatever you want to call it that doesn't in and of itself have value. I end that slide by saying tulips were not a hedge against inflation. What drove that price was consensus, and consensus also tanked it because someone realized that, oh, there's not actually more people. There's not more fools. There are no more greater fools to sell these tulips to. They won't buy my tulips for a higher price than I bought it for. And so I have to sell it for a lower price now. And the next guy says, oh, I also can't find anyone else to buy it from me for a higher price. So I have to sell it for a lower price. And the next guy says the same thing until the mania ends, the bubble burst. And so we move on from the word ETF, the phrase ETF, and we go on to fiat. Fiat. Everyone loves to talk about fiat. So in Latin, the word fiat means let it be done. And in English, the word means either an authoritative decree or an arbitrary order. And crypto folks want you to believe that government currencies are the latter and not the former, that government currencies are a arbitrary order. They don't want you to believe the former. But what they do try to make you ignore is that Bitcoin, cryptocurrencies, they only have value by arbitrary order. There's no authoritative decree. And that arbitrary order is the main issue here. So the truth is that government currencies are fiat in the sense of an authoritative decree. And this is not necessarily a bad thing. That's what gives the currency the value. That there's an economy within which it's accepted, and most importantly, that it's enforced. The taxman is going to come after you if you do not pay them in the government's currency. The value there is that there is somebody out there with a stick who will make sure that if you don't pay, you will spend the rest of your days in prison. That's the value. It's a monopoly of force. Nobody else has that. Only the government. And so they can make that authoritative decree and say, this piece of paper has value. And the rest of us say, okay, because we have elected our government to serve us. Sure, there's problems with the government, but it does the job well enough and the society is stable. What would crush the currency is if the society collapsed. If the society collapsed, we have bigger issues. And that's my bigger problem theory. So, if your currency is not accepted and enforced, it's not currency in that economy. Bitcoin is not accepted and is definitely not enforced by the US government. Thus, it is not currency. It's not accepted nor enforced by any other government. Sure, I think it was Ecuador who tried it and they are struggling, of course. And I want to end this slide by saying that gold, which cryptocurrency people say, oh, Bitcoin is digital gold. Well, gold also is not currency because it's not accepted nor enforced in the economy. You can't go to any store and give them gold as a form of payment. I want you to try it. See if that works. And be persistent too. If they don't accept your gold, tell them that they have to. See what happens. See if that monopoly of force does not show up and say, hey, leave this store or give them legal tender. So gold is not currency. And so if gold is not currency and your digital gold wants to emulate gold, it also is not currency because it also is not accepted nor enforced in the economy. Let's go on. Next, we have the sense of the word fiat, that is arbitrary order. So that's the sense in which cryptocurrencies operate. Bitcoin is owned by a super minority of the population in this world. A very few amount of people actually own the bulk of Bitcoin. They are the arbitrary order that gives this thing value. And so the problem is that there's nothing forcing those people in the super minority to continue to indefinitely value this thing the way they currently do. Today they might say, oh, it's worth $100,000. And tomorrow they might say, hey, I'm done here. I got mine. Time to sell to the greater fool. And when that starts happening, it will collapse. Because there's no more greater fools. It's like a pyramid scheme. The reason pyramid schemes don't work is because there's not enough people to make them work. There literally is not mathematically enough people to make a pyramid scheme actually productive. So, is the same with something like Bitcoin or tulips. There's not infinite greater fools. And so I say here, what gives a currency value is trust. Trust is the belief that something will be unchanging. If $1 is worth something today, it will continue to be worth something tomorrow. I will continue to be able to use this dollar in the store to get myself some bread. Maybe I'll have to use a little bit more dollars, some more coins to get that bread. But that dollar will still be legal tender in this store tomorrow and the day after, so long as our society does not collapse, so long as the government does not completely collapse. So Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies, they fundamentally and intentionally subvert trust. They don't operate on trust because they're not unchanging. They operate under a arbitrary order. So the next slide says that that Bitcoin is actually operating under the worst definition of the word fiat. It is fiat, but the worst type. And if that's the case, then why is it that there are so many people out there that think this is a good idea to give over their hard-earned money to somebody else's arbitrary order, arbitrary idea that this is worth $100,000? I can't be sure, but my educated guess, my educated bet is that they are operating under FOMO, the fear of missing out, and also the greater fool theory, which we've discussed at length in this video, which is that there will be somebody else tomorrow who will buy from them at a higher value, at a higher price. But the problem is what? As I've said already, there isn't an infinite amount of fools. And you also cannot be so sure that you are not the greatest fool at any given moment. So generally, my biggest issue with Bitcoin people and crypto people is that in order for them to sell you this investment, they have to first convince you that they are effective economists. And an economist, it's a pretty hard thing to be. You have to understand psychology, you have to understand sociology, you have to understand monetary policy, and you have to understand geopolitical affairs. There are so many things that go into being an effective economist. And just random Joe and Tyrone on the street want you to believe that they have what it takes to be that effective economist. And they're going to tell you that Bitcoin is a hedge against inflation when they couldn't even explain to you how inflation works in the economy and how it's offset, how it actually comes to be, when it becomes a problem, how we avert disaster in such situations, and even how the Great Depression happened and how we got out of that, because it wasn't inflation that did us in with the Great Depression. It was the opposite. It was deflation. That is a lot worse than inflation. And so the last argument I've heard from people on Bitcoin, the value of it, is that it's deflationary. Is that a good thing for a currency? Is that even if we forget good, forget morals, forget whatever, forget good and bad, is it practical that a currency is deflationary? No, it's not practical. And so here's the last slide here. The last thought I want to leave you with to consider is that a dollar, a US dollar, the government's currency, a dollar, is not a good store of value because it is currency. It's meant to be spent. It's meant to be spent. That's the key part here. Currency is meant to be spent. And so it's not a good store of value. It is the value. So furthermore, in order for the economy to not fail, that value must degrade over time, encouraging market participants to spend it sooner rather than later. Thusly, I contend that a currency cannot at the same time be a good store of value. Now, I say all of that because of what I previously said, which is that what did us in was deflation. Deflationary spiral occurs when people start to lose their jobs and then they have to hold on to money because they're afraid of losing their job or not getting more money in the future. And so they start to penny pinch. They start to pinch every dollar. So if people are not spending their money, businesses are not earning money. And if businesses aren't earning money, they don't have money to pay employees. And if they can't pay those employees, they have to let them go. And if those employees are afraid of losing their job, they also start to penny pinch. They start to hoard every dollar. And if they hoard every dollar, other businesses don't get income from customers. And so the cycle continues. They have to then, of course, fire their employees. And so we're in a deflationary spiral. And that's what caused the Great Depression to be so bad and so hard to escape. And so we don't want deflation. We want people to spend their money, their currency. We want those currency to circulate. Because you only make money if somebody else spends money. And so you can't be both a good store of value. You can't be somewhere that you just hold value and also be something that is meant to be spent. It can be both true at the same time. So what is Bitcoin? Is it a store of value? Is it currency? Is it a hedge against inflation? A hedge against inflation must be a consequence of the first two, that is a currency or a store of value, and or a store of value if you let the crypto people tell you, because they can't make up their mind. They don't know if it's a store of value or a currency, and they don't even know that those two things can be true at the same time. And they don't know that deflation is a bad thing for a currency, for an economy. So this thing is going up very high. That's great for people who have held it and they have survived and they now have something that's worth a lot more money. That's great for them. I can be mad at that. But I can't be mad at the suggestion that this is a great investment and without telling people that, hey, there's actually a pretty high chance that this goes to zero. We don't know when it's going to happen, but it's by consensus. So that's my only issue with this thing. I don't think it's a good investment. I don't think it's an investment at all. I think it's just speculation, just as lottery tickets are, or FanDuel, or whatever betting app you like. But if you are afraid of FOMO and regret, what I would do is just buy a small percentage of it, or a small percentage of your income. Use that to buy some Bitcoin one time and just let it sit. Forget about it. And if it goes to 1 million in the future, then that's great. You participated in the upside. And if it doesn't and it goes to zero, then you don't care because you didn't put a lot of your hard-earned money into it. So that's how I would go about this. And that's all I have to say for now. If you have any thoughts, follow me on Instagram, share your thoughts there, or just comment below. And if you ever do follow me on Instagram and you see my stories, please do feel free to comment, DM me, and let me know your thoughts, even if you agree or disagree. I would love to hear from you. I'm Lincoln with BoAcademy.org. Thank you again, and have a great day.